What's up, everyone? Welcome to Shot Callers Esports. I'm Matt Hempstead, and joining me today is James Bates, League of Legends writer for Rotowire. How you doing, man?
Doing well, thank you, Matt.
Good. So the Rift Rivals tournament is now over, and it didn't really go as people expected. Everyone thought Europe was the favorites. Fnatic was supposed to win the whole thing, and it was TSM who came down with it. So going forward, Fnatic, they kind of looked exploited at this tournament. To me, NA kind of was able to predict what they were going to do, and just kind of made them look pretty flawed in their kind of one strategy system. What do you think Fnatic's going to look like going back to the EU LCS? Will they find the same success that they had in the first half of the split?
So I think if the question of Fnatic, it depends upon their priorities. If their priorities are going to be to try to look better on international stage, they're going to probably try to shift their strategies a little bit. But we've already seen teams in Europe know exactly how Fnatic is going to be able to play, and they just can't counter it. They can't stop it. And I think if Fnatic keeps their same playstyle, they'll probably do pretty well in Europe, but then they'll go to Worlds, and the same thing's going to happen to them.
Yeah, it's just bizarre how NA, and specifically Phoenix One in the very first match that Fnatic played, was able to kind of see their movements across the map and deal with it pretty single-handedly. Sure, they lost that game, but they made Fnatic look pretty human, whereas in Europe, they just seemed like this unstoppable beast where they would pick Kennen and Tristan and win every game, whereas all of a sudden they run into these NA teams that just have a handle on their strategy.
I think it comes down to the junglers, really. I mean, I think this came up in the cast a couple times, but North America just has much more of those assassin, aggressive-style junglers, whereas in EU, you really just have Jankos and, I guess, Broxa to an extent, but other than that, they just let Fnatic do whatever they want early game, and in North America, they shut that down pretty hard.
Yeah, and the team that really stood out for EU was the Unicorns of Love, but even then, it wasn't outstanding by any means. I mean, they made it to the finals, but then they were swept by TSM. So for me, Exile was really the weak link in this series. I mean, especially early on at Rift Rivals, he was ganked repeatedly by these NA junglers that you mentioned earlier. So for the Unicorns, I mean, sure, they were the best EU team, but they have some flaws of their own going forward.
Yeah, I think you're right to point out Exile. I mean, I don't want to be down on the guy, but his champion pool looks like it's 6 months old. Like, why are you playing Ryze in the current metagame? You know, he brought, and not only he didn't bring it out once, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we won't try this anymore. He played it 3 times and lost every single time. So I have to say that he is definitely the point of criticism on the team. But on the other hand, he is the reason why they got some of the wins they did when he turned it around and showed us why he was one of the most hyped mid laners last split. So it comes back down to what I always would like to say about the Unicorns, in that the only thing predictable about them is that you just can't predict what's going to happen with them.
That's a very fair statement. So, I mean, I'm going to ask you to predict something anyways, because that's just what we do here. And that's going back to the EU LCS. I mean, sure, they were the best EU team at this tournament, but were they the best, and are they going to be the best at the end of the spring split?
I want to say no. I want to say that G2 will probably be the best. But honestly, G2 hasn't given me a reason to believe that will actually be true, aside from a couple of promising games they had after they were already eliminated from the tournament.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, because the teams that need to be better than the Unicorns have to change things. They have to make themselves better. If Unicorns and those teams all just stay the same way they are now, I think Unicorns will still lead the group at the end of the split. But I think that some of the stuff we saw from G2, especially against TSM, was very promising.
They did look very good at times, but they were unable to put together a full game. And part of that for me is Trick and his inconsistencies in the jungle, especially against these NA junglers that we keep talking about. He just kind of seemed outclassed. I mean, sure, some games he can carry it, but a lot of the time early in these games, he's just out of sorts, and all of a sudden G2's playing reactively instead of proactively.
Yeah, I think the best comparison point for North American fans would be comparing Trick to Reignover, where we know that these guys are really great when they have the correct metagame, they have the correct champions. But anybody who plays the game a lot can tell you that junglers are affected by metagame shifts more than any other role. It's like, one day you're playing Graves, the next day you're supposed to play Ivern, and those two champions aren't anything like each other. So I think the reason why we all hyped up Trick is, yeah, he's a great Graves player, he's a great Kindred player, he's a great Olaf player, but you can't play any of those 3 champions anymore. And he hasn't really shown that he can do like the Rek'Sai, the Gragas, the picks that people actually are playing. Yep. So he's going to be the focus for G2 if they want to improve, though.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
The meta's changed so much to a point where now it is more of a tank and Gragas. I mean, sure, there's those carry champions like Kha'Zix and whatnot. Right, yeah, unless you're Xerxes, and you can play whatever you want, really. Unicorns don't care.
Hecarim, I think, where you played Hecarim, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Hecarim, Warwick, he'll play pretty much anything, doesn't matter. But let's shift over to the NA side now. And I mean, TSM had a great tournament. They went 5-1 in the group stage, and then they won the whole tournament, sweeping the Unicorns. And it looked really impressive to me, where at some points in the NALCS, they kind of had these weaknesses, and all of a sudden they show up on this international stage and completely dominate Europe. What was it to you that really made them stand out? I mean, sure they were dominant, but just across the board, Doublelift looked great in the bot lane. Bjergsen was dominant once again in the mid lane. Are these guys the best in NA over CLG, over Cloud9, over everyone else?
So it's difficult to say, because when I talk about TSM and their weaknesses, the most blatant weakness always is the team gets very lost if they aren't able to just outplay the opponents that they're facing. The most important point of there is Svenskeren. So Svenskeren, when he is ahead, he makes these really brilliant invades and ganks that look smart and, work out well. He does all, but the problem is he also does those things when he's not. And then that's when you get like when he's playing at Samsung and he invades at level 3 and just dies and loses the game right there. And the reality is that I don't think Rift Rivals was a good litmus test for how TSM will do in North America, because all of the North American the European teams just, and I don't mean to flame EU here, but they were just of a considerable worse quality than the North American counterparts in this tournament, at least. And all the way that you challenge TSM, none of the teams there were capable of doing it. So TSM basically just got to coast to all of their wins. Will they still do the same thing in North America? That's really hard to tell, because there's much more scary teams there. You've got the Cloud9, you've got Phoenix One now on the upswing. You can't ever count out CLG, like you said. There's a lot of threats for them in North America.
Yeah, sure. And it's just funny to me to hear you say that, the EU counterparts were better than the NA participants when we talk about Phoenix One, a team going into it at 3-7, and no one thought they were even going to win a game. All of a sudden, they win 4 games, only losing to Fnatic. And I mean, Mike Young was the group split or the group stage MVP. Especially looked amazing on Thresh. And just to watch these guys all of a sudden turn it around so quickly with a couple of roster changes is really spectacular for me.
I agree. I would say that people who thought they weren't going to win a game were probably didn't watch the week of LCS before, because that was Phoenix One's first 2-0 week. And people have to remember that the carry core of Phoenix One, we know these guys are solid. Ryu and Arrow, they're not jokes. And nobody knew what to think of Mike Young and to think of X Special. I mean, X Special looked not terribly great last time we saw him on stage, but I don't even know what to say about Mike Young. This guy just comes in and he plays as if he was born for the stage.
Yeah, he really does. And I think the biggest thing for him, sorry to cut you off there, is just his confidence. And I mean, when he's out there, you've heard him say in interviews, it's just like he plays as if it's solo queue, and he's not afraid to make mistakes, and he really does show that. And I think that alone too, it makes your teammates say, you know what, we can win with this guy. Whereas maybe with Honori and Meteos, there were question marks in your head. Whereas with Mike Young, it's just this kind of free-going guy who's not afraid to get out there and make those big plays. I
agree entirely. The question will have to be for Mike Young is those kinds of guys work out really well in the short term, but it's when those guys run into the guy that like the Peanuts or the Ambitions, the Harus of the world, who just shut them down completely. It's going to matter. It's going to be important to see how he reacts the first time he just gets crushed, And if he keeps that solo queue, like I can do anything mindset after he gets completely wiped out in a game, then you'll know you have a keeper. But if he collapses like we've seen other players like him do in the past, well, I'm going to shed some tears about it, but it's a possibility. So that's what I'm looking to see.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big Mike Young fan. I try not to be biased, but you have to be a fan when you watch this guy. Those the way he's come onto the stage.
Just 2-0s a week with Nidalee. I'm a fan.
Yeah, exactly. Nidalee's not a meta champ, but he's making it work, and then his Lee Sin plays as well. He's just incredible out there. And I think right now, it might not be a popular opinion, but going forward, I think that Phoenix One is probably a stronger team at the moment than Cloud9 is, especially after watching Rift Rivals. I mean, I know you can't take too much away from this tournament, but Cloud9 had some big issues, especially for me in the top lane. And I know Ray's had some personal issues, and just trying to get Impact and Ray going, it seems to be an issue again for me. And then again, their mid game against the Unicorns specifically was a little lackluster, and they made some pretty obvious mistakes there. So I kind of put Phoenix One over Cloud9 right now. What do you think about that?
See, I would have said the same thing before Rift Rivals we even saw Rift Rivals. Phoenix One is on a very obvious upward trajectory, and Cloud9 has been either at best coasting where they are, or go on the downgrade. Now, I will say in fairness to Cloud9 in terms of their standing, they also have gotten 5 of their 6 games for the entire split against the top teams already out of the way.
Right.
Their schedule has been insane at the beginning of the split, and I don't actually think that Cloud9 is going to lose that many more games just because of the teams they have remaining. That being said, when it comes to them head-to-head, I think P1 definitely, you were correct to say P1 has the momentum. They're the ones who are sitting on the high horse. They just got their jungler as the MVP of the split, even though they didn't even make it to the finals.
Yeah.
Now the MVP tournament without even making it to the finals. I'm riding pretty happy if I'm Phoenix One and Cloud9. Yeah, you're right to say they were easily the North American weak link, but in fairness to them, you brought it up. Ray had personal issues and Impact had health issues, and we really don't know how much that affected their internal decision making. Yada yada.
Yeah, and I mean, going forward, it'll be interesting to see how they get back into the swing of things in the NALCS. I know Ray's trying to work through his problems, and we're not entirely sure when he's going to be back. But one more question for you before we let you go, and that is, how high do you think Phoenix can go in the NALCS here? I mean, for me, I think Phoenix 1 can definitely go into the playoffs. I know right now they're still kind of at the bottom of the standings, but I can see them going up to 5th and being in that group with the Immortals, CLG, Cloud9, and TSM.
I think that in order to answer that question, I'd have to be staring at the standings and the schedules, because I have
fair enough.
The question is very different depending on, is Phoenix 1 playing against Dignitas, Team Liquid, etc. for the rest of the split, or is their next 5 games TSM, Cloud9, Logic Gaming, and the Immortals?
Yeah.
Do I think that they'll be able to just run into the best teams in North America and beat them? I think that they probably are a best team in North America, but even in those circumstances, I'd say they're a coin flip against the real best teams, the proven best teams in North America. And whether they'll win those coin flips, I can't guess right now. I think that the important thing to see will be how seriously do the North American top teams take Phoenix 1 now that they've seen this performance out of them. Now, if they sit down and they stare at tape and watch how Mike Young plays the game and they shut this guy down, they're going to get the same 9th place Phoenix 1, because he's the real reason why they're back up now, upswing. If not, then yeah, I think they can be they're only like 3 games out of the playoffs, right? I don't think there's any reason why they can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Phoenix 1 right now, they've got all the momentum in the world, and I really like your point where some teams might still be sleeping on them, or they were sleeping on them back then, but all of a sudden now you saw them at Rift Rivals. They're this team with a lot of energy, a lot of character, a lot of strategy, and I think that they're going to go a long ways. So, James, thanks a lot for joining us. Any last words before we let you go?
I'm still rooting for Fnatic either way. Fnatic fan until I die, but no, I think that the final words would be that, above all else, the takeaway from Rift Rivals, that this is one of the best tournaments that I've ever seen. Even though Europe underperformed, most international tournaments, I'm not holding my breath about who's going to win. And even though TSM was stomping people left and right, I was still holding my breath when it came to the finals. And that's something that I haven't gotten to have. I mean, I guess I had that at Worlds 2016, but it was 2 Korean teams. It wasn't really which region's going to win.
Right.
So I love this tournament. That's what I got to say.
I'm with you, James. It was an outstanding tournament, Rift Rivals. James, thanks a lot for joining us. Again, League of Legends writer for Rotowire. Check out his stuff and check out rotowire.com. James, thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you in the near future.
I would have looked forward to it.
Awesome. Take care, man.
Take care.